A deep-sea robot spotted a sealed container resting in the silt of the Gulf. At first, researchers thought it was scrap metal, but when the robotic arm scraped the grime away, welded seams gleamed back. This wasn't cargo, it was a prison built to sink, locked forever. Until now. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Dr. Mark Holloway, 59, marine robotics engineer, believed his surveys would end quietly, but the ocean had been holding something back and his machine had just set it free. The ocean had always spoken in echoes, sonar pings, the groan of shifting currents, the occasional crack of pressure splitting rock, but this sound was different. When Mark Holloway's robot glided over the seabed, its instruments stuttered, jolting on something geometric. From the control deck above, the sonar technician frowned. "That's no ridge," he muttered, pointing to the monitor. On the screen, the return signal was sharp edges forming a perfect rectangle. Nature didn't make straight lines, not 2 miles under the surface. Mark leaned closer, squinting at the grainy image. "Probably a container," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "Plenty of freight goes over these waters. Sometimes storms knock them loose." He had seen it before, televisions, clothing, even cars entombed in steel and lost to the sea. But the younger crew members weren't convinced. "Too square," one whispered. "Feels wrong." On screen, the robot's spotlight pierced the darkness, cutting through clouds of drifting silt. The shape emerged slowly, ghost-like. A steel box, longer than a truck, embedded at an angle in the seabed. Not collapsed, not twisted by impact, but resting as if carefully placed. "See?" Mark said, pointing. "Shipping container." His words fell flat. He couldn't stop staring at the unnatural smoothness of its walls. Even after decades underwater, the metal held its form too perfectly, like it had been designed to withstand time. The robot inched closer. Its camera captured details, barnacles clinging to edges, streaks of corrosion trailing like scars. And then something stranger. Along the seams, the metal glistened. Not rust, but a dull, oily sheen seeping into the water. The crew wrinkled their noses, even filtered through rebreathers and vents. The odor carried. "What is that?" asked Lena, the biologist on board. "Smells chemical." Mark's stomach tightened. He brushed it off. "Fuel leak, maybe. Oil from the seabed. Happens." Still, the smell clung, metallic and sweet, like copper coins left too long in a damp pocket. The robot extended its manipulator arm, brushing silt away from one corner. The metal beneath was smooth, unnervingly clean. Another sweep revealed something unmistakable, a seam, but not a shipping container's standard latch. This seam was thicker reinforced. The sonar tech swallowed hard. "That's welded." Mark tried to mask his unease. Probably repairs, old cargo. But he didn't believe it. The weld was too neat, too deliberate. No accident, no quick fix. Someone had sealed this box on purpose. The robot's floodlight swept across the length of the structure. A faint serial number appeared, but most of it had been scorched away, the digits unreadable. "Burn marks underwater?" Mark's fingers drummed nervously on the console. "Feels staged," Lena whispered, arms wrapped tight against her chest. The others nodded silently. Mark forced a chuckle. "It's just metal, people, nothing more." But even as he said it, a sound rippled through the speakers, low, guttural, rising from the depths. At first he thought it was feedback, a mechanical hum. Then it stretched, reverberating like a groan torn from the seabed itself. The crew stiffened. "That's not the robot," the tech whispered. He checked his panel. The machine was silent. All systems normal. Another vibration rolled through, faint but unmistakable. The cameras shook as silt drifted up in slow-motion spirals. "Earthquake?" someone offered weakly. Mark shook his head. The seabed was stable, no tremors in this zone. He leaned closer to the speakers, straining to make sense of it. The noise wasn't random. It rose and fell like breath, like something vast exhaling into the deep. For a long moment, the only sound in the control room was that steady groan, vibrating through steel walls and human bones alike. Finally, Mark straightened. "All right, we log it, flag it, and bring it up." But his voice trembled, betraying him, because deep down, he knew, this was no ordinary wreck. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. Each had felt it too, that unnatural resonance crawling through the ocean, rattling their nerves. Mark tried to focus on the screen, on numbers and readings. Anything but the image in front of him. The container rested silently in the seabed, as though waiting. From the corner of the feed, a fish darted into view, flashing silver in the spotlight. It swam close, brushing against the metal box, and jerked violently, spasming. In a blur of motion, its body twisted, then went limp, drifting away into the dark. Jesus, someone whispered. No one said what they were all thinking. That fish had touched the container, and then the sound came again, longer this time, deeper, rumbling through the speakers like a slow heartbeat amplified by miles of water. Mark clenched his jaw. He wanted to dismiss it, to keep the crew calm, but inside, his chest tightened with dread. It wasn't the sea. It wasn't machinery. It was an answer. From the speakers came a sound like something waking up. The ocean kept records of its own, but the maps in Mark's hands were silent. No wreck here, no loss report, no storm path that lined up with a container this size. From above, the research vessel rolled on a gentle swell. Fog pushed in from the horizon like a slow, pale wall, thinning the afternoon sun to a flat gray disk. Inside the control cabin, monitors hummed and ticked with numbers that meant nothing comforting. Mark Holloway scrolled through shipping registries and insurance logs, a flicker of blue light washing over his face. The database showed decades of traffic across the Gulf. Freighters, tankers, barges. Nothing missing here. Still think it's cargo? Lena asked softly. Her breath fogged the glass of the side window. Outside, the first fingers of mist curled over the rail. Mark didn't look up. If it is, nobody reported losing it. The sonar tech, Evan, tapped the screen where a gray rectangle glowed against darker gray seafloor. This is tidy, though. No twist, no break. That box didn't fall. It was set down. Or it sank in slow, Mark said. The words sounded weak, even to him. He flipped to historical charts. Tides, weather logs, storm tracks. The dates marched back to the 1,970 seconds, then the 60 seconds. Nothing matched a drop here. He checked older Coast Guard notes, a few cryptic lines about a patrol diverted for training operations in 1958. The page was scanned, edges burned. Half the text was blacked out. Lena leaned in. What's that? Nothing useful, Mark said too quickly, closing the window. A thin, sweet metal smell threaded the room, like pennies in rainwater. It had been faint before, a suggestion in the air. Now it clung to their tongues. Vents pulling it in, Evan said, wiping his nose. That smell. Mark clicked through another map, one he kept offline. A stitched mosaic of submarine surveys he'd helped run years ago. The cursor drifted to their coordinates. Empty grid. He swallowed. He didn't like bringing that old work into the light. Funding had come with strict rules back then. Quiet rules. Behind them, the deck door groaned. A gust of damp air swept through the cabin, bringing fog and the slap of rope against metal. From the aft deck, a crewman shouted, then laughed too loudly, the brittle kind of joke that rattled when nerves were tight. Got ourselves a sea casket, boys. Evan forced a grin. You ever see welds on the outside of a shipping container? He replayed the robot's last pass. The camera caught the seam again, a bead of metal so clean it glittered under the light, even through silt. Repairs, Mark said, quieter now. Repairs don't go over every hinge, Lena replied. That's a seal. Someone didn't want whatever's inside to come out. Silence settled. The fog pressed harder against the glass. It made the world small, like the boat was alone in a bubble. From above, the scene looked like a diagram. The vessel, a pinprick. The fog, a slow spill of milk. The sea, a slate sheet stretching in all directions. Below, the robot hovered, its lamps slicing bright cords through the dark. Pull the Coast Guard comms? Lena asked, already reaching. Mark shook his head. Not until we're sure. We log, we confirm, we call. In that order. Confirm what? Evan said. We don't even know what to call this. A soft thump sounded under the cabin floor, a ripple up through steel. Everyone froze. The engine gauges were steady, no wave big enough to shove them. Mark pictured the container 2 miles down, black water pressing against black metal. He had the sudden absurd image of a hand inside that box, knocking Ballast shift, he said. Seize glass, Evan murmured. Time slid. The digital clock over the hatch clicked from 3:17 to 3:42 p.m. The fog made it feel later, as if evening had jumped ahead. Mark tried to think in checklists: mass, position, lift points, path to deck. He rehearsed the steps because they were solid ground. He did not imagine anything living inside the box. He did not imagine breathing. Run the historical AIS one more time, he said. 58 through 60. Evan nodded, fingers flying. Lines of position lit the screen, freighters arcing wide, tankers slicing straight. One narrow streak cut near their grid and then veered away, as if given a late order. The call sign field was blank. Military? Lena asked. Could be, Mark said. He should have stopped there, he knew. Mark Holloway had been around Navy projects long enough to recognize the shape of a closed door. The sweet metal smell sharpened until it tasted like a coin pressed on his gums. He found himself rubbing the edge of his thumb where an old workshop burn had left a shiny scar. Different lab, different rules. He imagined paperwork with his signature on it, filed in a vault. The past had a way of floating up. Mark, Lena said. Your call. He clicked the intercom. Deck, prep the forward winch and the A-frame. We'll rig for a low, slow lift. We'll sea-lock the deck and clear non-essential personnel. A chorus of copy crackled back, followed by boot steps and the clank of hardware. The boat shifted under them as men and women moved to their stations. Through the fogged window, Mark caught a smear of movement. The crane head swiveling, ropes snaking, the A-frame leaning over the stern like a steel gallows. He brought the robot's feed into full view. We'll check for lifting eyes, he said. The camera glided along the container's edge. Nothing. No brackets, no handles. The metal face was featureless, save for that seam, and a patch where numbers had once been. The lens paused on a blackened rectangle. Even underwater, the scorch had bitten deep. Who burns a number off a box at sea? Evan said. Someone who planned to leave it, Lena answered. Mark's jaw worked. He fought the memory of a conference room a lifetime ago, where a man with a clipped voice had used the phrase, non-standard disposal. He'd been told to design sensors, not ask questions. Money had come, and with it silence. He had walked away later, but the work didn't always walk away from him. From the speaker, a low tremor rose faint, like a distant engine turning over. It faded. The team stared at the blank of the sea on their screens, as if it might speak. Let's keep the bot at standoff, Mark said. No more touches. We log. That's it. Evan nodded and pulled the robot back a few meters. In the new angle, the container looked like a tomb, silt sloping up against its lower lip, a thin cloud rising from the oily seam, as if the sea itself were exhaling. Behind them, the deck door opened again. 2 volunteers from the marina had wandered up the gangway, drawn by the crane and the mystery. Y'all bringing up treasure? One asked, grinning. Deck's closed, Mark said. Please head back behind the tape. The men shuffled off, muttering. Their footsteps faded into the fog. Lena rubbed her arms. We should call sooner rather than later. We will, Mark said, after we know what we've got. She watched him. You do know what this could be. He didn't answer. He focused on the screen, where the rectangle sat dark and patient. The smell crept stronger, and with it a pressure behind his eyes, like a low tone only his bones could hear. His hands hovered above the controls, steady by force. Prep the lift plan, he said. We do this safe. Evan exhaled. Safe, he repeated, like the word might make it true. From above, the fog settled until sky, sea, and boat merged. The research vessel became a dim shape in its own world. From below, the robot's lamp caught a sheen in the water around the seam, an oily ribbon that bent and drifted like smoke. Mark zoomed in. The weld glimmered like a scar. He pulled back. The path forward arranged itself in his head. Tether load, winch speed, deck lock, containment tarp. Each step clicked into place. He ignored the old file burned into his memory, the one where men in suits used words that carved room from air. On the far monitor, the navigation chart held its white emptiness. No notes, no warnings, no name for the square of water they were about to cut open. A dull thud sounded underfoot again, smaller than before, like a second knock from the deep. Evan whispered, Please let that be ballast. No one replied. Mark turned off the registry window. He let the fogged glass take his reflection and smear it into something he didn't have to look at. He felt his heartbeat in his throat. A sound from the speaker, a slow, rolling exhale, came and went like an animal refusing to be heard. He could tell himself, as he had in other rooms in other years, that he would stop when it felt wrong. But the checklist had already started. The crane swung, the cables sang, the sea waded, flat and gray. Mark's chest tightened. If it was buried, it wasn't meant to surface, and if we dragged it up, something would come with it. The sea gave way slowly, as though reluctant to surrender what it had hidden. The winch groaned as the cable strained under the weight. The research vessel tilted starboard, its hull creaking. Metal on metal rang out a low, tortured moan as the A-frame leaned into the lift. From above, the water rippled outward, a bruise spreading across the gray surface. "Steady," Mark ordered into the headset. His voice was clipped, controlled, though sweat gathered along his temples. "Keep tension balanced. Bring her up slow." On the aft deck, crew members stood clear, eyes fixed on the cable as it sliced down into fog. Boots shuffled against steel, the silence broken only by gull cries wheeling overhead. The first edge of the container broke the surface. Water cascaded down its face in dirty sheets, foaming with a strange oil that spread in iridescent streaks. The smell arrived almost immediately, heavy and sickly sweet, coating the back of throats. One sailor gagged and covered his mouth. "God," Lena whispered, "it's worse up here." From above, the container looked like a coffin dragged from the underworld. Its sides were streaked with gouges, long, ragged scratches that cut deep into the steel. They ran in jagged arcs, crossing over one another, always curving inward toward the seam, as if something inside had clawed to get out. Mark scanned the welds. Thick seams, burned hot enough to melt the metal into swollen ridges. Not patchwork, not repair. Restraint. Behind him, two dockside volunteers who hadn't left earlier muttered nervously. "Looks like a casket, don't it?" one said. The other laughed, thin and brittle. "Biggest coffin I've ever seen." "Back behind the tape," Mark barked, sharper than he intended. His nerves hummed like live wires. The crane lowered the container onto the waiting tarp that stretched across the deck. It landed with a dull, wet thud, sending a tremor up through the ship. The whole vessel seemed to shiver. For a long moment, no one breathed. Evan broke the silence. "We're not logging this as standard cargo recovery." Mark ignored him. He knelt, gloved hand brushing along the container's face. The steel was pitted but solid, cold even through the fabric. His fingertips traced one of the gouges. The edges were sharp. Too sharp. He pulled back, the glove sliced. "Cut clean," he murmured, like the tool was on the inside. Lena crouched beside him, staring. How could anything inside make marks like that? He didn't answer. The crew began rigging stabilizers, bolting steel braces to keep the container fixed against the rolling deck. Each hammer strike rang out sharp, echoing through the fog. The sound carried strangely, bouncing off the mist like walls. Each blow seemed returned, reverberating from within the container. "Mark," Evan said quietly, "you're hearing that too, right?" Mark's jaw tightened. "Keep bracing." When the last bolt was secured, the deck fell still. The container sat squatting like an enormous tomb, its welded seams glistening in the dim light. The oily smell thickened, sweet enough to sting sinuses. A gull landed nearby, pecking at the slick that dripped across the tarp. It staggered once, wings flapping weakly, then dropped lifeless to the deck. The crew stared. Someone crossed themselves. "Ventilation masks," Mark ordered hoarsely. One by one, the team strapped on half-face respirators. Filters hissed as they drew air, but the smell still bled through, faint and metallic. Mark stood and signaled. "Cut here. We'll test one seam first." The grinder shrieked to life, sparks bursting as it bit into the weld. The screech of steel against steel tore through the air. It was deafening on the open deck, a single note of violence that set teeth on edge. But underneath, another sound rose, low at first, almost a vibration, then deeper, fuller a groan that seemed to come from the container itself. The grinder stopped. Silence fell, broken only by the lapping of waves. "Keep going," Mark said firmly. His voice cracked on the last word. The tool screamed again, cutting deeper. The seam began to split, just a hairline, enough to release a hiss of bubbles from inside. The oily streaks spread wider across the tarp. The gull's body twitched once more, then stilled for good. The welder stepped back. "That's as far as I'm taking it." Mark approached slowly, every step heavy, as if the deck had thickened beneath him. He knelt again, laying his palm flat against the cold metal. It thrummed faintly, a vibration too steady to be machinery, too alive to be coincidence. From the crowd of crew and dock workers, someone whispered, "It's answering you." Mark closed his eyes for half a second, steadying himself. He thought of sonar, echoes bouncing through the deep, of signals that came back different than they went out. And then the container shifted. Just a fraction, barely an inch, but enough to rattle the braces, enough to send a shudder through the deck plates. The crane's hook groaned as its chain jerked taut. Everyone staggered, grabbing rails and lines. "Earthquake?" one voice shouted. Mark knew better. From inside, something shifted and the dock vibrated, as if answering back. The cut line gave way with a sigh, and the sea's secret finally showed its face. Late afternoon bled toward evening. The fog thinned to a damp veil that left halos around the deck lights. From above, the container lay like a black tooth pulled from the jaw of the Gulf, strapped to the tarp, braced in steel. Everyone waited for Mark's nod. He gave it with 2 fingers. "Pry on my mark," he said into the headset. "Slow, keep the angle shallow." Crowbars bit. Hinges that shouldn't have existed shrieked as the seam peeled back. A tongue of stale water spilled across the tarp, thick with that oily iridescence. The smell rose, sweet metal and something medicinal turned sour. Evan gagged, mask or no mask. The lid, if it could be called that, lifted. Beneath, no rows of boxes, no stacked pallets. The floodlight caught pale surfaces and a low, padded interior. A capsule, not a container. Walls quilted in waterproof vinyl, seams stitched and sealed, corners rounded like the inside of an ambulance bay. A narrow track ran the length of the floor, as if for a gurney that had never returned. From above, the camera tracked forward in a slow glide. The image quivered as the crane line vibrated. Inside the chamber, straps hung slack, thick canvas webbing with buckles the size of fists. Shackles, two at the head, 2 at the foot, each bolted into reinforced plates. Scuff marks circled the plates like bruises around a wrist. Lena's voice was small. This was for a person. Mark swallowed. The word lodged like a pebble. Person. On the forward wall, a panel of gauges faced in, cracked glass, needles rusted at 0. Stenciling flaked but legible beneath grime. Oaksquigen divided by mix divided by press. A manifold of thin pipes ran along the ceiling, terminating in a rubberized mask that lay coiled like a dead serpent. The rubber had perished, blooming with white rot. Close up, Mark's gloved hand brushed a rectangle half hidden by slime. He wiped, and letters appeared, a stamped plate, stainless steel, riveted Official Property S. Navy Bio-Containment Unit 1958. The year felt like a cold finger down the back of his neck. The deck murmured low, collective, disbelieving. Outside the tape, neighbors who had lingered at the marina fence whispered and craned for a better view. Someone said, "Government stuff," with the reverence reserved for trouble. Evan pointed to the center. There, bolted to the floor track, was a steel crate no bigger than a footlocker, caged by a secondary frame with its own tiny shock absorbers. No handles, 4 latches sealed in spot-welded shields. Somebody had built a box inside a box and strapped it down to survive a war. Mark knelt at the chamber's mouth. The vinyl padding crackled faintly under his knee. The air inside was colder, damp with a chemical reek that stung his eyes. He reached for the badge again, tracing the letters, as if the word containment might give permission not to open what it contained. "Mark," Lena said, "steady because someone had to be. We need to document before you cut anything else." He nodded, made himself slow. Photos, measurements, the dull, clinical comfort of procedure. He listed, padding intact, shackles present, oxygen array obsolete, crate bolted, 4 latches, unusual frame. His voice was even. The skin at his temples prickled. A vibration feathered through the deck. The crate's frame quivered like a tuning fork. "Did you see that?" Evan whispered. Mark pretended he hadn't. He unsnapped a small crowfoot from his belt, slid it beneath the first welded shield. Metal popped, sang. He peeled the shield back and exposed the latch. It was stamped with a number 03 and painted once in red. The paint had bled into rust like dried blood. He did the next and the next. With each peeled shield, the smell intensified, the sweetness deepening into a coppery thickness that made saliva taste wrong. From above, the shot went wide, the dock ringed by curious faces behind police tape, the boat a slab of light and gray, the open chamber like a wound. The crane loomed. The sea kept its counsel, flat as hammered tin. Inside the chamber, something small ticked. A settling sound? A drip? It repeated. Faint, irregular, and every time it came, the hair on Mark's forearms lifted beneath the suit. Lena leaned in beside him, camera steady. Last latch, she said. He nodded. His gloves squeaked against the cold steel. He thumbed the final latch and felt it resist. Gum stuck. He pushed harder. It gave with a soft, sticky rip. The locker's seal let go. A breath hissed, not air, not vacuum, more like a wet kiss parting. A ribbon of condensed moisture slid along the edge and patted onto the floor with a dark coin drop of liquid. Where it fell, the tarp surface whitened in a brief frosting, then cleared again. The drop left a ring. Mask on, full seal, Mark said. His voice was tight. Filters clicked, straps cinched. He wrapped his fingers under the crate's lid and lifted. It rose a quarter inch, slow as a coffin lid in a bad dream. The smell surged, sweet and metallic and egg sour, braided with something like iodine. It wasn't rot exactly. It was a lab smell that had been kept too long in the dark. Careful, Lena breathed. He eased the lid higher. The gel inside caught the light. Opaque, gray-green, the texture of unset glue. Suspended within it, shapes floated slender glass tubes sealed with wax. Their labels fogged, their contents clouded, a constellation of vials at different tilts. Some were whole, their bubbles trapped like tiny moons. Others were cracked, their hairline fractures feathering out like frost. Where one had broken long ago, the gel around it had caved slightly, a pale cavity rimmed in crystal filaments like hoarfrost. He had expected vials from the moment he saw the frame. What he hadn't expected, what made his throat close, was what lay in the gel's center. At first it looked like a coiled strap, a loop of dark rubber that had been left to harden. Then the loop flexed. A slow, lazy ripple passed through it, subtle as the movement of breath beneath a blanket. The curve bulged, flattened, bulged again. The skin, if that was skin, was pale, almost translucent, with fine branching veins or threads running beneath the surface like seaweed fronds. Along one arc, a seam opened a narrow, pink slit that pulsed twice and closed, leaving a faint exudate that fogged the gel. Lena's camera steadied on the thing. Her gloved fingertips trembled in the edge of frame. That's organic, Evan said, too loud. Is it alive? And then immediately wished the question back. In the omnipresent hum of the boat, another noise spilled in. A low, continuous tone that might have been the crane's hydraulics or might have been nothing mechanical at all. Mark felt it more than heard it, a pressure settling behind his eyes, a sonar ping stretched thin and held like a note. Look, Lena whispered, voice shrinking. The vials. Some of them are marked. Don't touch, Mark snapped, sharper than he meant. He forced his tone down. We don't move anything yet. From the crowd on the dock, a gull's caw cut and failed. The bird sailed past, wobbled, and dropped somewhere in the fog out of sight. The smell thickened, slick on tongues. Mark leaned closer, against the warning of every nerve in his body. The gel's surface puckered where his warmth met cold. Beneath, the coiled pale shape quivered and released a thread of tiny bubbles that rose and hung, as if reluctant to leave. The slit opened again. This time, something like a frill along its edge lifted and settled, delicate, translucent, comb-like. Not a mouth. Not exactly. A vent? A gill? Memory flashed unbidden. A briefing years ago. A word spoken softly and forgotten, loudly non-standard, and a slide of a creature that had never seen sunlight. He shoved the memory away. Seal it, Evan said, voice thin. Seal it, please. Mark didn't move. The crate's interior had more to say. In a recess near the hinge, paper slept under wax, a packet of folded pages sealed into the gel. He could just make out stamped letters blurred by age. Project Moray, and the rest lost in milk. The coil flexed again, the slit closed, A faint vibration rippled the crate and ran up his arms through the lid. The oily slick across the tarp trembled in sympathetic rings. Mark exhaled. He realized he had been holding his breath far too long. This was not cargo. It was a chamber built to transport and restrain a human, and a crate designed to preserve whatever shared the box with them. A government pod, sealed to sink and never surface. He lifted the lid as far as the hinges allowed. Light slid deeper. The gel's face glowed like seawater seen through ice. More vials. More threads. Another pale loop curled beyond the first, finer, braided, its surface stippled with tiny pores that opened and shut in a slow, unsynced rhythm. A fresh wave of that sweet metal smell crept up and pressed against their masks. Lena's eyes watered. Mark's gaze snagged on a detail he had missed in the shock. Along the crate's rim, faint letters etched by a hand that had pressed through soft gel long ago. SUBJ06, as if someone had tried to leave a message while the box became their world. The gel convulsed, once gentle but unmistakable. Mark flinched back from the crate as a wet, pale coil unfurled within the dark gel and pulsed. The sweet metal smell blooming sharper, as if the thing inside had just drawn a breath. The crate was open, and the chamber no longer felt like metal and bolts. It felt alive. Mark staggered back a step, sucking breath through the respirator. The air filters hissed, but the sweet metal tang pressed straight through. His tongue tasted wrong iron and sugar, like blood stirred into syrup. Lena steadied her camera, its red record light blinking. "Keep filming," Mark ordered, though his voice trembled. "No edits. Document everything." Inside the crate, the coiled shapes floated in their chemical cradle, pale and veined, with that narrow slit opening and closing. But there was more. The vials surrounding it glimmered faintly. Glass walls held fluids of different hues. Cloudy amber, greenish black, a milky white that shimmered when the gel stirred. Mark leaned closer. Some of the vials bore faded stencils, numbers, letters, words half lost to time. Project Moray, dosage, subject. A few had fractured, their contents seeping into the gel. Threads of reaction spread from the cracks, like veins of frost in a window. The air above them prickled with a faint ozone tang. "Those can't still be volatile after 60 years, Evan said weakly. Mark shook his head. "I don't know what they are." At the hinge corner, the waxy packet of paper was half exposed now, jostled free by shifting gel. Mark slid a hook toward it, pulled it up slow, and peeled it into the light. A sleeve of paraffin cracked away, revealing folded onion skin pages stamped with military letterhead. Across the top, property of us Navy, Project Moray, classified. The first line scrawled beneath in fading ink. In the event of breach, do not expose to air. Keep sealed. Destroy subject matter on sight. Lena's breath caught audibly through her mask. Another line beneath. Containment chambers designated for ocean disposal only. Do not retrieve. Mark's hands shook. The page fluttered. He turned it, and on the reverse, a name appeared, handwritten in ink now blotched and faded. Dr. Allen V. Holloway. His chest went cold. His father's name. He dropped the page as if burned. It stuck to the gel and slowly sank back inside. From somewhere deep in the crate, bubbles rose. The coiled shape flexed, the slit along its surface widening just enough to reveal a glimpse of something glistening and ridged within. The hum that had been a background vibration grew stronger, a low note that filled the chamber, rattling bolts and braces. Mark stumbled back another step, his heart hammered. "Seal it," he started, but the words died. Because one of the vials was leaking, a thin crack spread across its side, spiderwebbing, until the tip burst. A single drop welled up, then fell, pattering onto the steel rim of the crate. Where it struck, the metal sizzled. Smoke curled upward. The drop didn't roll off. It sank, burning into the steel, as though the box itself were made of soft wax. "The hell," Evan whispered. Mark lunged forward, grabbed the rim, and slammed the lid back down. The vibration traveled through his gloves into his arms. The gel inside rippled in protest, and for an instant he felt not heard, but felt something like a pulse pushing back. The latch caught. The hum subsided to a faint thrum, like a heartbeat receding into distance. But the smell was stronger now, coating the air thick and sweet, almost floral. It left a chemical sting behind the eyes. Mark blinked hard. When his lids shut, he saw things he couldn't explain. Pale coils drifting, not in a crate but suspended all around him, filling the room, filling the ocean, stretching as far as his vision reached. When he opened his eyes again, the deck was still there, the crate still shut, but the impression lingered, ghost-like. "You okay?" Lena asked, her voice close. Mark nodded too fast. "Yeah, just yeah." He scrubbed a gloved hand across his mask. From above, a wide shot, the dock thick with curious onlookers, the boat a lonely glow in fog. The crew stood frozen, staring at the container like parishioners waiting for a sermon to end. Mark steadied himself, forcing his voice to work. "Nobody touches the crate again. Nobody. We bag the chamber, get it locked, call higher authorities." "Authorities?" Evan said, laugh sharp, nervous. "Like who? CDC? Navy? Who's going to believe this?" Mark didn't answer. His pulse still pounded too loud. The paper with his father's name pressed at the back of his mind. Something ticked inside the chamber again. 1, 2, 3. Like water dripping, though nothing fell. The sound crawled across the deck, bouncing unnaturally in the fog. Lena raised her camera again, framing the sealed crate. "Mark," she whispered, "it's still moving." Through the steel, faint but visible, the gel pulsed once. The whole box flexed like a lung. The oily slick on the tarp quivered. Ripples ran outward from the container, though no hand had touched it. The gull that had dropped earlier shifted slightly on the deck, its wing twitching once before going still again. Nobody breathed. The crate's vibration slowed. The hum subsided. Silence pressed in. Mark forced his hands steady. "Seal the chamber. Weld it if you have to." But his voice was too thin to cover what everyone had already heard. The leaking vial hissed again, and the steel beneath it smoked another drop sinking into the floor, burning straight through as if the container itself were nothing but skin. By nightfall, the secret on the deck no longer belonged to the crew. It belonged to the town, the fog, and anyone close enough to smell the sweet metal air. Word had a way of slipping through steel. It traveled on radio chatter and panicked calls. On the shaky video, a dock hand uploaded from his phone. By 7:20 p.m., headlights lined the marina road in a jittering string. Neighbors leaned on the fence, breaths smoking in the damp. A boy on a scooter, 2 fishermen still in rubber boots. The bait shop owner with a flashlight clenched in his teeth, eyes all drawn to the crane and the open chamber. The strange glimmer on the tarp. From above, the scene looked staged. The research boat, a wedge of light in the gray. The container a black rectangle, propped like a stage prop. The crowd a half-moon of pale faces beyond yellow tape. Fog rolled low, soft as wool, and the water around the pilings wore a rainbow sheen. A news van bumped over the curb and stopped crooked. A young reporter in a blue blazer jumped out with a cameraman, mic already live. "Are you bringing up hazardous waste?" she called across the tape. "Is the public in danger?" "We're busy," Mark said, not looking up. His mask hung at his throat now, ready to pull back on. The smell had eased, then returned in waves, sweet and iron thick, climbing the sinuses like vines. The crate inside the chamber was shut and latched. Mark had ordered it taped and tarped, the whole inner space draped with clear plastic that crackled when the breeze found it. Under the plastic, the locker pulsed at long intervals, as if remembering how. Lena filmed every breath of it, her camera steady even when her hands were not. Sir, the reporter tried again. "Is this military?" A man shouldered past her, not rough but sure, like someone used to moving people with only his presence. He wore an old field jacket, collar turned up, hair gray at the temples, jaw set hard. He stopped short of the tape and fixed on Mark. "You opened it?" he asked. No hello, no name. Mark's response stuck. "Who are you?" The man didn't blink. "You opened it. Tell me you didn't cut the inner box." Mark said nothing. The man's face went still in the way that meant anger had decided to hold its breath. "You have to seal it again," he said quietly. "Right now." Lena stepped forward. "And you are?" "Retired," he said. Then, as if he knew the code word the night required, he added, "Navy." Murmurs ran through the fence crowd. Someone whispered, "Knew it," like a prayer that had finally found a mouth. The retired officer no name offered kept his eyes on Mark. "You people don't understand what was done with these things. They lied to everybody. To us. To you. That box was meant to disappear." Mark felt the words like wait. "We're documenting and securing," he said. "Then we call it in." You already called it in, the man said, chin angling toward the road. Other headlights were stacking up. A second news van. 2 police cruisers rolling slow. Trust me, if I found you, they did too. The officer stepped closer to the tape, lowering his voice until only the crew heard. Listen to me. That seam, don't break it. Don't vent it. If you smell sweet again, you get back. It doesn't kill the way you think. Define kill, Evan muttered. The man's gaze cut to him. It changes. Then it kills. A gull cried and cut off mid-call as it wheeled over the slick. It hit the water, wings sculling, then lay flat, drifting like a leaf. Lena swallowed. What is Project Moray? The officer's mouth tightened. Something that should have died in a file room. Mark felt that old clock inside him tick 2 beats faster. The onion skin page with his father's name flashed behind his eyes. He pushed the thought down into the same place he'd shoved a dozen other thoughts that didn't help. Back to work, he said. He pulled his mask up and sealed it. Evan, bring the ROV feed up on the cabin screen. I want the internal camera angle we parked before the lift. They scrambled into the control cabin. The fog pressed at the windows, making the room feel like a submarine of light. Fans from the equipment hummed, a dry mechanical counterpoint to the wet world outside. Lena slipped in last, and the retired officer stood in the door like a shadow that refused to choose a side. Evan scruffed his hair and scrubbed at the touch panel. The ROV feed bloomed across the main screen, the underwater view recorded earlier, before the winch had dragged the box up. The bot hovered in blue-black gloom, lamps cutting cones through drifting particles. There was the container, half-sunken silt, seam glittering like a scar. There, the oily trail creeping up, lazy as smoke. Fast forward to the internal lens, Mark said. Evan tapped. The angle shifted. The ROV's secondary camera, small and tucked near the arm, had peered straight into a narrow gap at the seam they'd brushed clean. The image was close, almost claustrophobic. Darkness and glints. A stripe of matte padding inside, and something else beyond it. A softness where there should have been hard walls. Hold, Mark said. The clip ran. At first, nothing moved. The sea dust floated like snow in a black room. The camera's tiny autofocus hunted, breathed, settled. Then, at the far edge of the frame, a shape drifted into focus, a curve pale as a peeled grape skin. Not metal, not rope. It pressed soft against the padding, then withdrew with a faint elastic tremor that made the vinyl wrinkle and smooth. Lena whispered, "That wasn't there on the first pass." Evan scrubbed back 3 seconds and played it again. The curve returned, closer this time. Veins fine, and branching mapped faintly under its surface. For 1 beat, it rested against the padding, and the padding indented, as a cheek does on a pillow. "Jesus," someone breathed. The retired officer didn't swear. He only said, You see why it was welded, son?" Mark did not answer. He could hear blood in his ears, fast and soft. The monitor's fan whirring sounded like wind rising, though the cabin was sealed. "Keep rolling," he said. The shape slid out of the frame. The camera shook as the ROV adjusted. A second later, another movement blurred past the lens, a thinner strand, whip quick, then gone. The sea dust swirled in its wake. The autofocus hunted again, pulled tight and caught it. Close up, a narrow slit along the pale curve, a seam that opened and flattened and opened again, slow and patient. A delicate frill lifted along the rim of that slit, transparent as mica, and trembled like a comb. The frill sank. The slit closed. Mark's breath fogged his mask for a heartbeat. He wiped it with the back of his glove, mechanical, useless. Behind them, the crowd outside pushed closer to the tape. The reporter raised her voice, pitching for the camera. "Officials have not confirmed." A police officer stepped in, palm out. "Back up, please. Keep the lane clear." The marina itself was turning strange. The water around the piles didn't slap or suck like normal. It lay almost still, as if listening. The rainbow slick braided itself into thin stripes that drifted toward the boat as if pulled by breath. In the cabin, the ROV feed held the pale curve for a last second as it drew near. The autofocus snapped sharp. Everyone leaned, the room somehow smaller now, as if the glass itself bowed. The curve stopped. It filled the frame. And then it changed. Where there had been only seam and frill, a darker oval formed beneath the surface, an iris-gray blot, webbed by capillaries, glossy with gel. It wasn't an eye, not like theirs, but it did the thing eyes do. It found the camera. Lena's hand tightened on the counter until her knuckles blanched. Evan's lips moved, soundless. The retired officer did not move at all. The oval dilated, the frill trembled, the curve leaned closer, soft pressing against hard glass. The room forgot to breathe. It blinked, slow, deliberate. By dawn, the mystery had grown legs, rumors scuttling from dock to diner, whispers thick as fog. But what broke wasn't just the story, it was the people holding it. The research vessel's deck was cordoned now, yellow tape looped like a noose. Floodlights cast everything in surgical glare. The container sat tarped, bolted down, but the shape beneath it was unmistakable. Everyone on the Marina Road could see its outline. Mark hadn't slept. None of them had. His eyes burned. His chest ached with the ghost of that metallic sweetness. The night had been one long loop of replayed footage, the pale curve pressing into the camera lens. The slit opening, the blink. Inside the cabin, Lena scrolled through digitized archives she'd managed to access overnight. Her voice was hoarse. Look at this. She enlarged a faded document stamped 1960. It was a congressional hearing transcript, most of it redacted, but one line escaped the censor's ink. Non-carbon adaptation experiments, codename Moray, results unsatisfactory, recommended disposal in controlled marine environments. Evan leaned over her shoulder. Non-carbon? What does that even mean? Not based on what we are, she murmured. Not built on proteins, not cells. Something else. Mark rubbed his scarred thumb, the one he always touched when memories pushed too hard. He knew enough to recognize obfuscation. In his early career, he had seen reports like this, phrases designed to mislead the public, while hiding work best forgotten. The crowd outside had thinned in the cold morning hours, but it was swelling again. More cameras, more questions. The fog clung low, turning headlights into glowing orbs. The oily rainbow slick still spread from beneath the dock, coiling lazy tendrils that refused to break apart. From above, the marina looked infected, a bloom spreading out from one black seed. Then came the scream. It cut through fog and chatter alike, sharp and human. The crew spilled onto the deck. Near the rail, Evan was on the ground, limbs jerking. His respirator dangled loose, his skin flushed pale, sweat sheening his brow. His eyes rolled, pupils quivering. Get him on his side, Lena shouted, rushing forward. Mark knelt, grabbing Evan's shoulders. His skin felt too hot, almost fever burn. A sour metallic smell poured from him, stronger than anything the crate had leaked. Mark gagged behind his mask. Evan choked, coughed, and when his eyes snapped open, they weren't steady. Tiny red filaments spidered out from the whites, twitching in time with his pulse. Don't touch the slick, he gasped. His lips trembled. It's inside. The words broke on a convulsion, his back arched. For a breathless second, the skin along his forearm moved. Not twitched. Moved like something small was pressing up from beneath, wriggling along veins, trying to find its way out. Jesus, Lena whispered, hand clamped over her mouth. The retired officer, the one who had warned them the night before, stepped from the shadows by the tape. He didn't waste a second. He grabbed Mark's shoulder and pulled him back. It's starting. What's starting? Mark demanded. His throat burned. The man's face was pale, lips thin. This is what happens. You don't get sick. You get changed. Evan seized again. This time blood flecked his lips, except it wasn't blood. Not fully. It was bright, crystalline, glinting like crushed glass. Someone screamed again, one of the younger crew. The sound tangled with the murmur of the crowd outside the tape, who surged forward to see. The police line buckled. Mark turned to the officer. Help me restrain him. But before he could finish, a roar split the air. Engines. 2 black trucks rolled down the Marina Road, headlights cutting through fog like blades. They didn't slow. Tires splashed through puddles, brakes screeched, doors flew open. Men in dark uniforms spilled out, faces hidden by masks. Their patches bore no insignia. Navy, the retired officer hissed. Told you. The newcomers moved with brutal efficiency. One barked orders no louder than normal speech, but everyone obeyed. Within moments, 2 hauled Evan onto a stretcher, strapping him down as he thrashed weakly. Another 2 unfurled black canvas tarps and began covering the chamber. Cameras flashed from the crowd, reporters shouting questions drowned in the chaos. Mark shoved forward. He needs medical. A gloved hand stopped him flat to his chest. The masked man's voice was muffled but final. You're done here. Lena shouted. You can't just take... They can, the officer muttered bitterly. His fists were tight at his sides. Evan's stretcher vanished into one truck. The container, still tarped, still seeping, was chained by winch and dragged halfway off the deck. Sparks lit as metal scraped steel. The oily slick on the tarp quivered and spread faster, but no one outside the tape noticed. The crowd was busy shouting, cameras hungry. Mark tried to push past again. Tell me what's inside, he demanded. His voice cracked. I deserve. The masked man leaned close. His visor reflected Mark's own tired eyes. His words were flat. You saw enough. Forget the rest. They hauled the chamber onto a flatbed. Chains clattered. Tarps whipped. Within minutes, the black trucks roared away, engines fading into the fog. And just like that, the deck was bare. The neighbors at the fence buzzed, shouting questions, demanding answers. Police shoved them back. The news reporter shouted into her mic, words tumbling over one another. Mysterious operation, government removal, potential hazardous discovery. Mark stood in the silence that followed, chest heaving. His gloves smelled of that copper-sweet rot, and the taste of it lingered in his throat. He turned slowly. The tarp wasn't clean. Where the container had rested, the steel beneath was pocked with holes, not burned deep, but eaten, as though acid had wept into the deck itself. Some holes still smoked faintly. Lena whispered, It's still here. The officer nodded grimly. They don't clean, they erase. Different thing entirely. Mark pressed his palms to the railing, staring at the oily film lapping against the pilings. In the silence, he could almost swear it pulsed with the tide, like breath. And in his chest, a realization pressed heavy. The Navy hadn't confiscated to protect them. They had confiscated to hide it. They didn't explain. They just erased us. Morning broke thin and colorless, and with it came the kind of proof that didn't argue it mapped. By 9:10 a.m. The marina had emptied of black trucks, but not of questions. The dock still wore a sheen the color of gasoline rainbows, and the air still carried that faint sweet metal taste that made coffee go bitter on the tongue. Mark stood in the control cabin with Lena and Evan's empty chair, the absence like a dent in the room. The retired officer waited by the doorway, a hinge no one could quite shut. Lena pulled up a satellite suite she'd paid for out of Oldfield Grant's synthetic aperture, thermal overlays, a hobby-turned-lifeline. These are passes from last night and this morning, she said, voice low. On screen, the Gulf spread black and blue, streaked with shipping lanes like pale scars. Overlaid in false color, something bright pulsed near their coordinates, a rectangular wound glowing beneath the surface. Not just one, she whispered, fingers darting. She widened the frame, another rectangle resolved to the east, a third south-southeast. Then a fourth, smaller, shadowed by a shifting smear like stirred silt. Evan would have whistled. The thought landed and hurt. Mark swallowed. Drop pins. She did, each click like a nail driven into wood. The pins formed a lazy arc across a narrow band of seabed that followed an old trench line as tidy as a ruler. It wasn't random. It was placement. From above, it would have looked like a constellation made by hands that thought in grids. How deep? Mark asked. Within 50 meters of our find, Lena said. Same signature, dense core, minimal deformation. The retired officer leaned in, the map reflecting in his eyes. They dumped them in a run, keel hauled by time. He spoke like a man reading the names on a wall he'd visited too often. Mark paged to a sonar sweep they'd run before the Navy arrived, quick, messy, but enough. The returns were clean blocks, long shadows. Then he slowed the playback. One shadow lagged behind its source, a smear of darkness that kept breathing in the display long after the ping passed. It made his scalp prickle. Echoes didn't linger like that. Why's it trailing? Lena asked. Because it's not only steel, the officer said. It's what's inside. That stuff, it holds a note. A radio crackled on the bulkhead, chittering with marina channel chatter. Weather, bait prices, a boat complaining about a fouled prop. Then a diver's voice cut in, tight and breathy. Copy. We're on station north of the breakwater. Visibility 3 meters, maybe 4. Weird slick. Dropping now. Mark yanked the mic. Who authorized divers? The reply came from the harbor master, thin, harried. Tour outfit snuck out before dawn. Said they'd look for your treasure. I've been trying to hail. Static hissed. A second voice bled through, bubbles punching syllables apart. Bottom at 20. Silt heavy. There's smell, like hot pennies. A ragged inhale. Okay, I've got a shape. Big, square. Oh man. Lena and Mark locked eyes. The officer's jaw tightened. On screen, Lena overlaid the diver's GPS drift on her map. Their track zigzagged too close to the second pin. It's not safe, Mark said into the mic. Back out now. Repeat, back out. No answer. The radio carried only the intimate sound of air moving through a regulator and the damp click of equipment. Then, look at this seam. Its weight. Do you see that? Silence. Say again, the harbor master said. Light, the diver whispered. There's light coming from under the silt. In the cabin, the four of them stilled. Mark felt his own breath go shallow behind the mask hanging at his neck. Get out, he said, loud enough to make the metal stanchions vibrate. Ascend immediately. That's an order. Static. A scrabble, harsh. Then the open sound of ocean without a human in it, the lonely rush of nowhere. Diver 1, respond, the harbor master snapped, voice cutting up into sharp edges. Diver 1. 30 seconds. 40. The clock on the cabin wall ticked like a metronome for panic. Lena's knuckles whitened on the desk. She whispered, 3 minutes is hypoxia. At 2 minutes 40, the radio coughed up a noise that was almost a laugh and almost a choke. A voice came back, thick and ruined. Here, I'm here. The words dragged like nets. Ascend now, Mark demanded. Do not touch anything. Do not look, he heard himself, too late for specifics. Do not do anything. Oh, the diver's voice strained. Something wet clicked between syllables. It's fine, just had to look. Mark closed his eyes. Behind his lids he saw onion skin paper sinking, a name inked in a hand he knew by family photographs. He opened them again to the map, to the pins that proved whatever this was. It was bigger than a single bad decision. Outside, the crowd at the fence had thinned to stubborns, a couple in raincoats, a teenager with a skateboard, the reporter still broadcasting into fog like it was the future. The rainbow film around the pilings had thickened into ropes, narrow bands combing toward open water as if tugged by something below. The radio crackled once more, and the diver's voice changed. Clearer, almost bright. Surfacing, he said, and for one heartbeat hope flared in Mark's chest. They met him at the dock ladder. From above, the shot would have tracked camera floating backward as a figure rose in slow motion, black wetsuit crawling with threads of weed. Hands reached down, clasped forearms, hauled. He landed on his knees, mask askew, eyes wide and glassy. He opened his mouth to speak. Nothing came out. His lips moved, forming words that didn't arrive. Then a stream of seawater spilled from him, thin at first, then steady as if his lungs had forgotten what to hold. It puddled on the boards around his knees, soaking through wood, trickling back to the gulf. He gagged again, and more water came, flecked with iridescent sheen. His pupils pulsed, the irises stuttering under a tremor Mark felt in his own jaw. The retired officer crouched close but didn't touch, voice purposeful. Blink twice if you can hear me. The diver blinked once, then slowly, deliberately, again. He tried to shape a word with lips that had become strangers. What came out was a soft click, like a camera shutter closing underwater. Sirens called from the road late, inevitable. The harbor master waved paramedics forward, and they lifted the diver onto a stretcher, turning him gently on his side as water continued to leak out of him, as if the gulf had been poured inside to settle him like a weight. In the cabin, Lena dragged the map wider. There's more, she said, not looking away. She toggled a filter, and thermal noise fell away to leave only the stubborn heat signatures of the world. The pods glowed faint. The water around them was cooler than it should have been, like pockets of night. And the largest glow wasn't where she expected. It hovered beyond her 4 pins, half hidden by a cloud of scatter. She had to max out the gain to pry it into view. A rectangle that refused to end, its long axis dwarfing the others, its edges oddly soft, as if silt had tried and failed to smother it. She cross-checked depth contours, Mark ran a quick back of envelope on the console with trembling fingers, translating pixels to meters. The number that came back didn't fit in his mouth. From above, the water looked the same. From below, something vast lay in ordered silence. He pictured the line of pods as he'd seen them on screen, then imagined a captain in 1958 giving quiet orders in a chart room. Here, 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 and here. He imagined the last order said without a name, only a nod. The radio murmured again, the paramedics talking calm lies to each other about vitals, about oxygen, about protocols designed for sensible injuries. Mark stared at the sonar return, still breathing on his screen. It wasn't only big, it was wrong. The echo stretched, then settled, then somehow stretched again, as if the box itself took its time to answer. Something pressed at the back of his teeth. He tasted copper and sugar and the stale iodine of old hospitals. The smell in the cabin seemed to thicken, though every window remained cracked. He knew, suddenly, why the Navy had moved so fast and so hard. Not because of one chamber on one dock. Because the line didn't end here. He gripped the edge of the console until his knuckles blanched. Lena looked over, pupils too large, hands trembling just enough to blur her next click. The retired officer didn't ask what the number was. Men like him always knew before the rest. Outside, gulls circled and didn't cry. One pod loomed longer than a warship, its shadow still echoing on sonar. Do you think this is natural, or something far darker? Secrets have a half-life. When they leak, they poison more than the water. The Navy trucks had taken the chamber, but paper traveled differently. By midday, Lena's contact in Washington sent a scrambled message through an encrypted channel. The subject line was a single word, Moray. Mark sat hunched in the cabin, sleeves rolled, eyes raw from fatigue. His laptop glowed pale against the fog-dark morning. Files unfolded in front of him, declassified fragments stitched together by whistleblowers and archivists with long memories. He scrolled past censored pages until the black bars thinned enough for words to breathe. Project Moray, initial goals. Development of marine adaptive bioforms for strategic use in denied zones. Beneath, type notes. Cross-reference with civilian penal units. Conscription of test subjects authorized by Executive Directive, 1957. Mark's stomach clenched. Penal units. Conscription. Plain words hiding unspeakable acts. He forced his eyes on the page. Experimental summary. Subject groups exposed to modified deep-sea organisms. Resultant adaptions included gill analogs, altered bone density, non-carbonic tissue samples. Mortality rate, 92%. Lena's hand covered her mouth. They weren't testing fish. Mark scrolled. Images flickered up, grainy photographs scanned from microfilm. Men strapped to gurneys, women behind glass partitions, pale skin glossed with sheen. A sequence of 12 frames showed a figure convulsing in a tank, then lying still, chest concave as if the ocean had pressed it flat. Evan's empty chair felt heavier. The retired officer stood in the corner, arms folded, his silence louder than any protest. Mark forced the next file open. A field report stamped with urgency. Disposal procedure initiated. Non-viable subjects to be sealed in containment units. Chambers deployed to Gulf for permanent burial. Site designation, Moray Row. His throat closed. Burial. Not disposal of chemicals, burial of people. Lena whispered, "Those pods, they're coffins." "No," Mark said, his voice scraping. "Not coffins. Cages." From above, the research boat drifted in fog, the marina a ring of pale faces still clinging to tape and rumor. Beyond them, the town had already sprouted stories. Secret weapons, Cold War trash, aliens. Only 4 people in the cabin saw the truth scroll past in ugly type. Mark clicked the last unsealed file. It was dated months after the congressional hearing. Subject 06 incident. Unit breached during sea transfer. Fluid contamination observed. Chamber lost at depth. Recommendation, seal and abandon. No recovery. A blurred photo accompanied it. A shipping deck. Men in masks dragging a container identical to the one they had raised. In the corner of the frame, a figure hunched on hands and knees, skin glistening, face turned away. Shackles dangled from its wrists. The file ended there. Mark leaned back, breath shallow. "We lifted it." Lena's voice shook. "The one they lost. the one they swore never to recover. The officer finally spoke. And you know why the Navy came running. They weren't here to clean your mess. They were here because they knew which number you pulled. Mark stared at the photograph, at the blurred shape hunched in the corner. His chest hollowed. The packet of onion skin paper they had half seen in the crate burned in memory. Dr. Allen V. Holloway, his father, his signature tucked inside a nightmare. For years, Mark had told himself his father's generation only built machines, never cages, that whatever secrets died with him belonged in another era. Now those secrets breathed again. The radio jolted him back. A voice crackled local news, caught on the emergency band. Officials refusing comment on potential bioweapon discovery, public warned to avoid contact with shoreline slicks until further notice. Lena slammed the laptop shut. It's out. Everyone's going to know something, just not the truth. Mark rubbed his face. Truth would break them. The officer's gaze bored into him. Truth broke you. Outside, the fog shifted, thinned, then closed again. Through it, gulls wheeled without sound, wings cutting arcs too steady, like compasses marking circles no one had asked for. Mark forced himself upright. We need containment. If these units are breaking down, if the vials are leaking, this doesn't stop at Evan. The whole coast could... He stopped. His voice faltered. Because at that moment, the sonar tech, one of the locals the Navy hadn't chased off, called from the aft deck. Dr. Holloway, you'd better see this. They stumbled out, masks tugged back into place. The man pointed to the sonar screen bolted near the rail. The feed pulsed with a fresh return, the trench line glowing with its constellation of pods. But one of them had shifted. Its echo was angled differently now, as if the box had rolled slightly in its silt bed. Mark leaned in. His breath fogged his mask. Not seismic, the tech said. No quakes logged. It just moved. The return sharpened. For half a second, the sonar trace showed not a block, but something bulging outward, as if the box walls had flexed. Then the signal smoothed back into a rectangle, innocent again. Mark's pulse raced. He turned to Lena, to the officer, to anyone who would listen. They're not sealed tombs, they're live units, and they're waiting. The retired officer's face was carved from stone. Waiting for what? No one answered. The oily slick at the pilings rippled once, though the water above was calm. Project Moray hadn't been about building weapons. It had been about burying failures. Each pod held not chemicals, but people altered, abandoned, and left to the ocean. And the one they had pulled up, the one marked 06, had already breached containment once before. Mark stared at the sonar return trembling on the screen. The lost chamber was labeled 06, and now, 60 years later, 06 was awake. By late afternoon, they decided to do the one thing every instinct warned against touch the others. The Navy had erased the deck and driven off with the chamber, but the ocean hadn't signed any paperwork. 4 more pods still lay along the trench like teeth in a jaw. Mark stared at the pins on Lena's screen until they felt like eyes staring back. Nearest units within 2 nautical miles, Lena said. The room smelled faintly of coffee gone sour and that lingering sweet metal tang that never fully left. Shallowest of the 4, we can reach it with the ROV and the hot tap rig. The retired officer stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders set. You try to weld that thing and it'll fight you. Mark cinched his mask straps loose around his neck, voice flat. We're not lifting, we're sealing. If a seam's failing, we cap it. Buy time. He didn't say for whom. The town, the coast. The man on the stretcher still coughing water in some anonymous van. At 4:18 p.m., the vessel idled above the second pin. Fog thinned to a greasy haze. The sea looked like oiled slate, slicks spiraling outward in dark rosettes. From above, the boat seemed to hover over a bruise. Launching, Evan's substitute Luis, a local tech, said, knuckles pale on the joystick. The ROV slid into the water, lights blooming in green darkness. Cameras adjusted, hunting for edges. The speakers in the cabin hissed as the tether paid out, a long umbilical unspooling into cold. Mark watched the feed. Silt rose in drifting curtains. Then there it was, a rectangle buried to its belly, seam ribbed like a welded scar, corners softened by decades of sleep, no lifting eyes. No marks but that same scorched rectangle where numbers used to be. Bring in the clamp, Mark said. They'd pulled a steel collar from the shipyard, 2 half-moons machined to mate around a seam and choke it tight. It dangled under the ROV like a jaw. The retired officer leaned forward despite himself. "You can't fix what it is with what it isn't," he muttered. "But go on." Luis feathered the thrusters. The ROV drifted close, lights whitening the seam. Something shimmered on the metal, a film that slid away from the lamp beam like shade avoiding Sunday. "Hold," Mark said. He swallowed. "Lena, record full telemetry. Temp, pH, any off-gas." "Recording," she said. Her voice carried a tremor she didn't bother to hide. The clamp kissed steel. The hull sang so faint it might have been imagination. Luis tightened the hydraulics. The jaws closed another millimeter. The song deepened. At first it was vibration felt in metal, a whisper through deck plates, a pressure under the ribs. Then it threaded the cabin, a low note like distant whale song heard through walls. The fans didn't mask it. The human voices didn't dent it. "Reading pH drop," Lena said, squinting at drifting numbers. "Tiny, but oh." She pressed a hand to her temple. "You hear that?" No one answered. They all did. In the feed, the seam gleamed wet. Where clamp met metal, a thin line of bubbles stitched outward and upward, like a zipper being undone by water. The bubbles didn't rise. True, they drifted sideways, then down, then hung, as if they'd changed their minds about being bubbles. "Hydraulics set," Luis said through clenched teeth, bringing the welder in. The ROV's second arm swung the hot tap torch into view, a stub of engineered fire meant to bite steel underwater. Luis thumbed the control. The torch licked the seam with a needle flame. The pod moved. Not much. Just enough for the camera to catch the seam, flexing not metal, yielding under heat, but something inside pressing back, shaping the wall from within. The weld puddle skittered away, refusing to take. "Back off," the officer said sharply. "Again," Mark said. The flame found the seam a second time. This time the steel reacted like living tissue, blistering under heat, then smoothing as if it remembered its shape and denied the change. The clamp's pressure gauge ticked down on its own. Hydraulics complained. "Pressure is bleeding," Lena said, tapping the readout. "We're not losing it up here." In the speakers, the note rose a half step. Mark felt it in his teeth. The sweet metal smell grew stronger in the cabin without a draft to carry it, as if scent could pass through signal. From above, the shot would have been eerie. The boat steady, the fog a cold ceiling, the water almost still. Below, a small machine leaned a glowing tool into a patient that refused the scalpel and learned the surgeon's rhythm in a single bar. "Lights flicker," Luis muttered. The cabin dimmed, brightened, dimmed. One monitor popped, then recovered with a gelatinous smear across the colors. The clock over the hatch hiccuped from 4:26 to 4:19, and then back again. Lena made a soft, surprised sound and dug thumb and forefinger into her brow as if to pinch a headache stem. "Stay with me," Mark said. "Luis, one more pass, shorter. Just tack the edges." Luis nodded, sweat shining on his upper lip. The torch kissed metal a third time. The seam opened an eye. Not literally, not an iris, but the metal bulged, thinned, and in that moment the camera caught something behind it, a paler dark pressed to a darker dark, with a narrow slit that widened and folded. Widened and folded. A tremor ran along it like the flutter of a comb. The note in the speakers thickened into almost voice. For a heartbeat, Mark smelled iodine. Old antiseptic rooms. His father's coat when he came home late from the lab. He blinked and saw no. Remembered an auditorium and a slide with a word he'd pretended not to hear. The torch sputtered. The electronics hissed. A line of frost walked across the inside of the cabin window, impossible in the Gulf heat letters ghosting into view where someone's warmed breath met the cold. MOR before the fog ran and smeared the rest. "Power flux," Lena said, voice small. "Batteries are good. This is something else." On deck, a coil of rope lifted and settled as if under a sleeping animal's breath. The oily curl around the pilings thickened and drew inward, bands combing tight toward their spot on the water. "Back off," the officer repeated. "Now." "No," Mark said, too quietly. His hands were steady through the tremor running his bones, steady like they had been steady threading wires through fragile boards when he was 20, and wanted to build things that only did good. Again. Luis looked at him, saw something there, turned the torch on. The pod exhaled. Bubbles tore free along the seam, not rising but racing sideways like silver ants. The clamp sprang a quarter inch. The torch sputtered and went dark. Every monitor in the cabin went black, then on, then black again. In the momentary dark, the note didn't go away. It grew teeth. Lena clutched the edge of the console, knuckles white. The taste of copper and sugar swelled on tongues, thick and wrong. Mark reached for the rail and felt it hum, a faint purr as if a cat the size of a ship lay sleeping under their hull. And then silence. Not the absence of sound. The presence of a larger quiet that flattened smaller noises and made breathing feel like a trespass. "Hydraulics lost," Luis whispered. The clamp eased of its own accord, like a jaw unclenching after a dream. On the screen, the seam smoothed. The blistered steel forgot being blistered. The pale darkness behind it withdrew. Lights returned, weaker. The clock read 4:33 and kept going. The window's ghost letters were gone, leaving only streaks. Lena wiped her eyes. I was hearing wails. In here? Mark nodded once. Me too. The retired officer watched him the way a man watches a friend step too close to a ledge. You can't shut what doesn't agree to be shut, he said. This isn't welding, this is negotiation with a door that thinks. Mark kept his eyes on the feed. The pod lay still as if nothing had happened. He imagined 4 more. He imagined the huge one Lena had measured, shadow like a ship. He imagined the truck bearing 06 somewhere he couldn't follow, straps creaking in a rhythm that wasn't rowed. The boat rolled slightly on a wave that didn't exist. Somewhere, out in the fog, a buoy bell rang once, and then decided against it. He could leave it. He could write the report, send the files, let the tide make new rumors over the old. He could say, not my job, and mean it the way a man means it when he's already decided to sleep badly for the rest of his life. He thought of his father's name, inked on onion skin. He thought of Evan's empty chair. He thought of the diver kneeling and pouring the gulf back out of himself in a thin, unending pour. Mark set his jaw. Bring the ROV up, he said. Prep the patch again. We'll redesign it. Heavier, thicker. We try from the outside and the inside. We are not done. The officer exhaled, half a laugh, half a grief. Son, the water writes the last line. Mark didn't look away from the screen. The note he couldn't hear anymore still hung in his bones. If I opened it, I'll close it even if it kills me. The worst breaches never roar in daylight. They arrive when the world is half asleep, when no one is ready to witness. 2:13 a.m. The research vessel rocked on a windless tide, its lights throwing long spears across the fog. Most of the crew had drifted into uneasy naps on benches or against bulkheads. Even Lena, who had kept her camera glued to her hand for 2 straight days, had finally succumbed, her head pillowed on her arm in the cabin. Mark hadn't slept. He sat with a mug gone cold, eyes on the sonar screen that pulsed quietly, one green heartbeat after another. Every ping came back steady, as if the trench was frozen in time. Yet under that calm, something in his bones whispered movement. The retired officer had offered to stand watch. He dozed in a chair by the hatch now, his head lolling, hands still curled around the butt of a pistol he hadn't unholstered in years. Mark envied him the sleep, though he doubted it was restful. Then the ship shuddered. Not a wave, not ballast. A deep vibration rising up through steel plates, rattling mugs and clipboards, buzzing in teeth. Mark jolted upright. The sonar screen blinked once, twice, then went black. Every monitor in the cabin followed. The generator coughed, caught, then died. Darkness swallowed the vessel. From outside, a gull shrieked once high and panicked, before cutting off as if a knife had trimmed the sound. Power, Mark barked. His voice cracked in the pitch. No reply. The only sound was the groan of the hull shifting, as though the boat itself had become part of something larger that moved beneath. The officer woke with a start, pistol half drawn. What? A metallic clang cut him off. From the deck. The kind of sound no seaman mistakes. A latch giving, a door forced. Mark sprinted to the aft deck. Fog pressed close, pearly and wet. The floodlights guttered once, tried to flare, then sputtered out, leaving only dim emergency LEDs that painted everything in red. Through the haze, he saw the tarp. It was no longer flat. The container they had tried to patch, still lashed and braced, was bulging at its seam, ribs pressing outward. The plastic cover trembled as if it breathed. Then, with a sound like fabric tearing underwater, the seam split. The tarp whipped back, chains clattering to the deck. Jesus Christ, the officer whispered. His pistol hung useless at his side. From the seam spilled a liquid darker than seawater, thicker than oil. It streaked across the steel deck in snaking rivulets. Where it ran, the paint blistered, the metal hissed. Mark grabbed a crowbar, heart hammering. Get the torches. But before anyone could move, the seam yawned open wider, metal flexing with impossible ease. Something inside had pushed, something stronger than steel's memory. The deck vibrated again, harder this time. A toolbox skittered across the floor and tumbled into the slick. It sizzled, foamed, then collapsed inward like a tin can on fire. The retired officer swore, finally raising his pistol. He fired once, twice, the shots sharp in the fog. Sparks kicked from steel, ricochets whining. The seam kept opening. From inside, no shape emerged, only more of that black fluid, seeping fast, smoking where it touched. It ran to the deck drains, vanished into the bilge. Then the smell hit. The same sweet metal reek that had haunted them for days, now multiplied 100-fold. It coated lungs, seeped through masks, burned eyes until tears ran hot. Mark gagged, but he couldn't look away. The emergency lights flickered. For a second, the deck strobed red, black, red. In that heartbeat of clarity, he saw the oily, slick ripple not outward but inward, like water being pulled home. "Get back!" Mark shouted. He seized Lena's arm, dragged her toward the hatch. She stumbled awake, choking, camera still clutched tight. Behind them, the officer fired again. The seam gaped, a full foot now, the welds dripping like melted wax. From within came a sound none of them mistook for machinery, a long, slow exhale that fogged the night and rattled the dock pilings. Mark slammed the hatch shut. "Seal it!" he barked, spinning the wheel until metal screamed. The officer's boots thudded down the companionway after him, pistol still clutched, eyes wide and wet. "You can't lock the sea out," he rasped. Then the lights came back. Every bulb on the vessel flared white-hot, humming. Consoles booted, monitors blinked alive. But none showed data. Every screen displayed only one thing, a sonar return, live-fed. The trench line, the pods, and the largest one a warship's length pulsing brighter and brighter, as though laughing. Lena raised her camera with shaking hands. "Mark, look." He turned to the porthole. The fog had thinned enough to reveal shoreline a mile away. A public beach, empty at this hour. Empty, or it should have been. Something was wrong. The tide was still, yet the swings at the children's playground tilted back and forth, steady arcs with no wind. A slide shivered as if a weight had brushed down it. But there were no children. No voices. No people at all. Mark's throat went dry. How? The officer closed his eyes. Because it's not staying in the water anymore. The playground swings still moved, but no children. Dawn didn't wash anything clean. It only revealed where the night had crawled. By 6:40 a.m., fog lay in torn bands over the marina road. Sirens had come and gone. Yellow tape fluttered against damp railings like tired flags. The beach beyond the point remained eerily still. No joggers, no dogs, only the slow, deliberate creep of tide. The playground swings still rocked a little, as if the air itself remembered children. Mark stood in the cabin with hands that wouldn't warm, even around a fresh coffee. The radio murmured with clipped dispatch codes and the harbor master's steadying lies. Lena sat at the chart table, skin gray, camera on her knee. The retired officer watched the door instead of the screens, as if expecting the sea to knock. A new tone bled across the emergency band flat, official. Federal authority assumes command of waterfront perimeter. Civilian vessels advised to clear channel. Containment protocols in effect. The words were clean, their meaning dirty. Don't ask. Lena's phone buzzed. She stared at the number a second too long, then answered. Trent? She listened, and whatever color she had left drained away. Slow down. What? She swallowed. Where are you? She put the call on speaker. A man's voice rasped through static, wind, fear. Motel off Route 12. They're here. 2 cars. I did what I could, sent everything to your drop last night. If I don't... His breath hitched. He warned me. Said I was already late. Mark leaned forward. Who warned you? Someone who wore the same badge I used to. The voice said, thinner now. Listen. Moray was wrong from the start. Disposal wasn't about the pods, it was about the people they made and then unmade. They tried to fold them back into the deep. That's why your water smells like pennies. A cough, wet. If they find me, don't let it burn. Fire makes it, he didn't finish. The line cut. A moment later, the emergency band carried a new item in a voice trained not to shake. Unidentified male found deceased. Motel 7, Route 12. Scene secured. Lena's fingers curled into her sleeves. Mark stared at the radio as if he could rewind time by force. The officer said nothing, jaw tight. 7:12 a.m. The Navy convoy returned, not with the subtle dark trucks from before, but with a caravan that announced itself. Flatbeds, a portable incinerator unit, men in suits with clipboards, others in suits that looked like they could walk on the moon. They fanned out as if rehearsals had been held decades ago, and only the actors had changed. Dr. Holloway, a woman in an unmarked windbreaker called, though she didn't wait for confirmation. You will clear your team. This is a federal hot zone. Mark met her on the aft deck, wind slapping at his jacket. One of ours is in a hospital or a van or a ditch. Another can't speak. Your zone was our deck first. Her eyes were the color of stainless steel, and now it's ours. The portable incinerator unfolded itself like a cruel flower petals of heat shield, a throat lined in ceramic. 4 men wheeled in a steel coffin stamped with biohazard sigils. Mark didn't need the stenciling to know what lay inside. The container they'd dragged away at midnight came back like a debt. They positioned it with precision, bordering on reverence. A man with a tablet read off temperatures, airflow, feed rate. Another checked a row of red canisters. The retired officer stood just inboard of the tape, arms folded so hard his knuckles went bloodless. They tried this before, he said softly. Not to anyone, maybe not even to himself. They always try fire next. The wind shifted. That sweet metal scent crept under masks, hooked behind the eyes. Mark glanced at Lena. She nodded once, lips pressed tight, recording every move, every angle. They fed the container to flame. From above, the shot would have looked surgical. A box sliding into a mouth of light, heat warping air into liquid. The unit roared, fans howled. The ceramic throat went from orange to white. The tablet man called numbers like a prayer, 1600, 17, hold at 18. The air wavered as if the marina were seen through a desert road. At first, the box obeyed physics. Paint bubbled, edges glowed, seams darkened to cherry. Eyebrows singed on men who never flinched. The smell shifted toward campfire, and then passed, into something like seared copper. Then it changed. The steel didn't drip, it drew in. Edges that should have slumped seemed to tense. The welds, far from surrendering, rose like scars inflating. The white-hot air wobbled, stuttering, as if sound itself had thickened. In the cabin, every loose screw hummed in sympathy. Mark felt a pressure behind his eyes, a tone too low to hear, too heavy not to. The box pulsed, not visually, viscerally. A thump moved through the deck, into boots, up bones. Heat monitors spiked. A hairline vein of brightness chased itself along the seam, then dove away. The flame licked, confused. The officer whispered, "Back it out." The woman with the stainless eyes didn't answer. She nodded to the operator. The heat rose. Wind rattled the caution tape. Fog shredded. People at the fence slid back 2 steps without knowing they had moved. Lena's camera juddered and steadied. The container pulsed again. Brighter. And with that brightness came something inside Mark's head, a single, clean ping like a sonar hit in an empty ocean. It rang in the bell of his skull and kept ringing. He lurched sideways, palm to the rail. Lena groaned, hand to temple. Even the officer flinched, lips peeling in a soundless oath. The men at the unit hesitated for the first time, a human tremor running through drilled muscle memory. The flame didn't win. It ate everything on the tray paint, rust, soot, and left the container bare as a bone that wouldn't char. The fire isn't consuming, the tablet man said, strain cracking his cadence. It's reflecting. No, refracting. It's... Kill it, the officer barked. Now. They cut the heat. The roar fell to a hiss. Metal cooled in frantic clicks. The container sat in the throat of the machine, unblackened where it should have been, skin shimmering with a heat mirage that didn't fade. And then it exhaled no steam, no smoke, a breath you felt rather than saw, a ripple through air and people and water. The oily ropes at the pilings pulled toward the unit like iron filings finding a magnet. Mark's vision narrowed. Behind his eyes, the ping brightened, then brightened again, a strobe without light. It wasn't pain exactly. It was instruction, like being told, again and again, to remember a name you had tried to forget. Words tumbled out before he could lock them. My father signed Moray memos in '58. They told him it was salvage, not burial. His voice shook, then steadied, anger hardening it. I built sensors that year one of their contractors used to trace the trench. I walked away. I told myself it was just mapping. Lena's eyes shone. Not judgment, pity maybe, and something like relief that the silence had finally broken. Steel creaked. The box shivered in the cooling maw. A soft pop sounded under the incinerator's shell, like a jar easing its lid. "Get it out," the woman ordered, composure finally nicked. They winched the tray. Wheels squealed. The unit coughed a curl of heat. The container slid into air that didn't want it but made room. It lay there dull, almost ordinary again, except for the way it held attention. People couldn't help but look. A hairline split winked along one corner, then sealed as if embarrassed. The tone in Mark's skull dimmed a fraction, then flared. He had the absurd thought of a lighthouse underwater, lanterns swinging, signal sweeping, a black Atlantic no one living had charted. Reporters called questions that evaporated in the heat shimmer. The gulls above circled once and didn't cry. Lena whispered, "It's not failing." "No," Mark said, breath slow, forced. "It's calling." The officer's head snapped. "To what?" Mark didn't answer. He couldn't. The ping in his skull drew a line through fog and map and memory straight to the trench. He saw, in his mind's sonar, the long return Lena had measured the warship-sized shadow that had taken its time to answer. The woman in the windbreaker spoke into a mic on her shoulder, voice pitched low. "Recommend escalation to thermal neutralization alpha. Confirmed resistance to incineration. Subject still, active." She didn't say the word alive. A paramedic jogged past with a bag valve mask and a face he kept composed by chewing it. The playground at the far beach had stopped moving. Not because wind had shifted, because something else had. Mark's hands shook. He looked at Lena. "If we tell them to stand down, they won't. If we help, we become them." "Then what?" she asked. He didn't get to answer. Somewhere inland, too close, sirens braided into a single rising thread. The radio coughed, spit, then spoke in a dispatcher's voice gone small. Multiple calls, residential. Reports of unusual water in homes. Advise units to static ate the rest. The container on the tray gave a faint, satisfied shiver. The fire ate everything except the container. It pulsed, brighter, like sonar in his skull because it wasn't resisting. It was signaling. If this happened to you, what would you do? Some betrayals come with a knife. Others arrive with a folder. By noon, the marina looked like a war zone disguised as an accident site. Navy tape roped off the pier. The incinerator smoldered with nothing to show for its fury. Reporters shouted themselves hoarse from the fence line. Mark sat at the chart table, knuckles white against the wood. The ping in his skull still throbbed in intervals, like someone tapping glass from the inside. His father's name wouldn't stop burning through the memory of that onion skin letter. A uniformed aide slid into the cabin without knocking. He dropped a brown folder onto the table with a dull slap. "For Dr. Holloway," he said flatly. "Authorized disclosure." Mark stared at it, throat dry. "Why me?" The aide's eyes didn't flicker. "Because you already know." He turned on his heel and left. Lena leaned closer. Her voice trembled. "Don't open it." But Mark already had. Inside, typed memos, handwritten notes, photographs stapled by corners. The first memo was dated April 1957, stamped Project Moray Confidential. Objective: establish adaptive survivability through human-ocean interface. Utilize penal recruits and expendable civilian populations. Success metric: 10% adaptation retention. He read it twice, each word stabbed. He could almost hear the boardroom voice of some long-dead admiral pronouncing expendable, like it was a tool, not a life. The next page was worse. Test subjects 0105. Expired during Gilgraft phase. Subject 06. Initial signs of metabolic stabilization. Secondary modifications required. Mark's chest squeezed. Subject 06. The chamber, the pod. And then a note in a smaller, hurried hand, scrawled at the margin. Recommend deep burial at sea. Containment impossible. Adaptation irreversible. He turned to the photos. Grainy, black and white, but clear enough. Men strapped in padded rooms identical to the chamber they had lifted. Shackles identical to the ones he had touched. In one photo, a young man stared at the camera through the gap of a mask pressed to his face. His eyes were wide, too wide, veins broken. Beneath the mask, the skin of his neck showed faint raised slits. Not surgery scars, not yet healed. Something else. Mark's stomach lurched. He pushed the photo aside. At the bottom of the folder lay a single sealed envelope. No stamp, no address. Only his surname. Holloway. His fingers shook as he tore it open. Inside, one page, typed, signed. Alan V. Holloway, Senior Research Consultant, Project Moray. The words blurred. He forced his eyes to focus. Son, if you are reading this, then you found what we buried. I told myself it was to end a war. I told myself I was preventing a darker experiment. But what I built, they used. They promised disposal. They lied. Moray was never an accident. It was bait. One day, someone would raise what we sank. And that someone would have my name. Mark's heart pounded. His mouth went dry. They set me up, he whispered. The retired officer's voice came low, steady. Not just you. Every man who ever signed those pages. But they picked you to finish it. Lena's eyes filled. Mark, this isn't research. It's inheritance. He slammed the folder shut, breath ragged. Rage pressed against the edges of grief. His father hadn't just built the chamber. He had written the script, handed it to his son across 60 years. Outside, the crowd swelled. Sirens wailed inland. News vans lined the street like teeth. The sky darkened as another storm front muscled in, thunder muttering low. And still, the sonar return pulsed on the monitor, the largest pod, the one longer than a warship. Mark pressed his palms to the table. It was never disposal. It was delivery. The officer frowned. Delivery to who? Mark shook his head. Not who. When? He realized then why the pods had been scattered like constellations. Not just to hide them. To wait. The ping inside his skull spiked, a sharp, echoing ring. He staggered, palm slamming to his temple. Through the pain, he heard a whisper that wasn't in his ears. 06 has signaled. Others will answer. Lena's breath caught. It's not signaling us, it's signaling them. The room went silent, save for the muted throb of sonar. Outside, the beach lay still. The swings no longer moved. Mark stared at the folder one last time. His father's final line glowed in his mind, more curse than confession. One day, someone would raise what we sank. He clenched his fists. That someone was him. The pods weren't lost accidents of history. They were planted bait to be raised. Mark hadn't stumbled on a secret. He had been chosen long before he knew it. The last page of the folder wasn't blank after all. At the bottom, in faint type, a final note read, 1 vial unaccounted. Beneath it, a second line burned colder. And it wasn't missing. It was gone. The water never gave back what it kept. It only learned your name and carried it further out. By the end of that week, the marina wore new rules. A chain-link fence rose where the crowd had stood, wound with plastic slats to blind the curious. Federal seals hung crooked on the gate like medals on a tired chest. The portable incinerator was gone, leaving rectangle scorch marks ghosted on the planks. The boards still held a sweet metal tang that no hose could wash away. Mark Holloway signed 3 different statements, and none of them said what mattered. One was for the county, one for a federal office that didn't print its name, and one for a lawyer Lena swore existed. He wrote in a careful hand and felt each letter like grit under a tooth. He gave them the dates, the clips, the coordinates. He did not give them his father's last page. That went into an envelope that went into a safe that went somewhere not on any map. By the second Monday, a press release filtered through local radio like a stone skipping. Coastal Chemical Incident Containment complete. No risk to public. It was the kind of sentence that sounded clean if you didn't roll it over and smell it. A small memorial bloomed at the end of the pier for Evan. No body, no service, just flowers in jars and a photo in a sleeve the fog touched and clouded each dawn. The diver from the tour outfit came by once, stood with hands hooked in his pockets and eyes that slid around words. He had learned to breathe without coughing water. He had not learned to speak. He blinked when people said hello, slow and deliberate, as if surfacing from a depth no one else could reach. From above, the town settled into a pattern of pretending. Boats left later and returned earlier. Nets came up light. Cats stayed indoors. Children were told not to dig where the tide line ended. The bait shop owner kept selling shrimp that quivered too long on ice. Mark sold the boat. He told himself it was temporary. He told Lena they'd rebuild a lab somewhere with stronger walls and fewer secrets. He told the retired officer nothing, and the officer seemed to know why. Men who have stood close to a shared edge don't need to lean again to remember the drop. He took a rental car inland and kept taking roads until the air smelled like dust and warm cedar instead of salt. He bought a small house that had a porch deep enough for rain to drum a rhythm that didn't sound like sonar. He sealed the bathroom fan because the hollow hum could trick a tired mind. He learned the stubborn quiet of land. Cicadas, a dog 2 blocks over, wind through oak. It was not silence. It was a different chorus. At 3:13 a.m., 3 weeks later, he sat up in bed and tasted copper. The sound that woke him was nothing, a faint, phantom ping in the long bone behind his ear. The sort of noise an old refrigerator makes or a heat duct settling. He held his breath and it came again. He swung his feet to the floor, held the edge of the bed until the room's angles steadied. In the kitchen, the clock read 3:13, because clocks like that always do in the stories you don't want to tell. He made tea and did not drink it. He waited for the next ping. It did not come. Dawn did. He told himself there were no swings here to move without children. Back on the coast, the fence grew higher. The sign on the gate changed to something longer. Federal training site. Keep out. The gulls returned in smaller numbers, flying different circles. Some afternoons, the rainbow sheen around the pilings braided itself into long ropes, then thinned and unwound like hair in slow current. No one measured pH at the public tap anymore. It had been declared stable. The stable number tasted like a penny under the tongue. A journalist with stubborn eyes ran 3 pieces that made nobody comfortable. Buried pods, buried past. Who owns a secret ocean? And 6 boxes, 1 town. She called Lena twice. Both times Lena talked about currents and thermoclines, never about a letter with a familiar name at the top. The 3rd time she called, she asked, "Did you smell it?" And Lena hung up because some questions are doors. The retired officer came to Mark's inland porch only once. He sat on the rail and didn't drink his coffee. They watched rain batter the hibiscus someone else had planted years ago. "They'll move whatever they can lift," he said, "and leave whatever lifts itself." He didn't add "you can't weld a tide." He had said it already, and the air had kept it. "When it stops calling," Mark said, "maybe it will sleep." The officer looked at him the way men do when they respect you too much to lie. "It won't stop," he said. "It only changes who can hear." On a Tuesday, a school reopened 2 miles inland from the bay. The children ran out at recess and did what children do, tested fences, traded candy, dared the one with the gummy shoes to lick the flagpole. When the bell rang, the janitor found a stripe of iridescence along the lowest rung of the jungle gym ladder, no wider than a shoelace. He wiped it with a rag and threw the rag away, then tied the bag and tied it again. That afternoon he drove the trash to a different bin than usual without knowing why. On a Thursday, a storm threaded lightning through the Gulf, and the fence at the marina hummed in a low key you could feel in your teeth. The harbor master stood inside his office with both hands on the counter and told a tourist from Ohio, "Unfortunately, no charter today," in a voice that didn't want to say ever. On a quiet Sunday, the church by the water held a service for those we lost to confusion. It was the sort of phrasing that fit in a bulletin and landed like a small stone when spoken aloud. People cried anyway, because crying felt like ballast. Mark learned the back roads to a farmer's market that didn't sell fish. He walked the aisles and bought peaches with fuzz that warmed his palms and tomatoes that smelled like Sunday. In line, he caught the sweet hint of metal and almost turned, almost asked, almost said, "Do you smell that?" But the woman behind him was pregnant and humming, and the man at the stall was weighing okra, and the sound was only a refrigerator starting up somewhere behind the wall. At night, he watched old family VHS tapes until the colors bled into each other and the edges of faces went soft. In one, his father stood in a windbreaker on a pier, hair lifting, hand on Mark's shoulder. The camera shook as if someone were laughing. The tape hissed where it had been left on a hot dashboard in 1993. When the wind hit the microphone, it made a low hum that sounded a little like a groan pulled up from below. He turned the volume down and watched without hearing. Some mornings, Lena emailed coordinates and numbers that meant we're still here without saying it. Some nights, the retired officer didn't call, and Mark knew that meant we're still here too. The big return on the private map Lena kept didn't go away. It shifted sometimes, the way a sleeper rolls and takes the sheet with them. Summer leaned into fall. Tourists came back with different appetites. The bait shop tried selling shirts. The reporter switched to council meetings and a zoning fight about a condo no one wanted. The fence gathered rust along its bottom rail, where salt always wins. One evening near dusk, Mark drove back to the water alone and parked where the view was mostly chain link and memory. He stood outside the gate like any other man who had worn his share of regret, smooth with thumb and time. The harbor was quiet because wind had gone elsewhere, and the pilings creaked like old chairs, and something somewhere far below answered with a tone he thought only he could hear. He put his hand on the fence, felt a faint tremor move through the wire, and told himself it was a truck on the causeway. He stayed an hour and left with the taste of penny and flowers caught behind his molars. On the way home, he passed the playground. The swings hung still. He didn't look twice because sometimes mercy is choosing the angle. The ocean remained. The row of buried pods remained. The largest shadow remained, long as a warship and patient as a winter. The one vial the folder said was gone remained gone. None of those facts argued with each other. They sat together like stones at low tide, slick with a sheen you could see if you stood close enough and wanted to get your shoes wet. Change lay where it always had, in the seam between what people knew and what they agreed to say. Mark slept some nights, badly most. He learned the exact pitch of his refrigerator and the exact silence when power blinked. He kept his phone charged. He kept his father's letter in a place where water couldn't find it. He kept a promise no one had asked him to make. The town learned to talk around a thing. The Navy learned to talk through one. The sea, as ever, learned everything and told nothing. And sometimes, when fog rolled off the bay and pressed its cool cheek against the docks, old men at the bait shop swore they heard the long, slow groan of something turning far below the pilings, the smell of rust and something sweet walking the planks before dawn. And sometimes, the dock groans like something still chained below.